Hi, good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining me today, ladies and gentlemen. It's always a pleasure to host so many people, and I'm sure you'll be able to take a thing or two away from the session today. Before we get started with the good stuff, let's kick things off with a few housekeeping rules. So, if there's anything wrong with the slides or the sound, ping me a quick message in the chat. It is monitored, and there's a Q&A section at the very end of the presentation as well. But feel free to pop everything into the chat in the meantime. This way we won't forget to answer your questions at the very end. So that's the second slide with my name on it. Off to a great start. Just in case you were wondering how to pronounce it, it's Juri Weidenkeller. I know, very confusing. First name is Slavic, the last name is German. I don't know what my parents were thinking, but hey, here we are. I'm the head of business development here at IQ and IT, and although my background is in renewable energy systems, I ended up working in IT. It was presented as a cool opportunity, and I fell in love with the industry. So here we are. Before I joined this company, I've spent a few years working for a cybersecurity vendor, where I get to meet my now two directors, Kat and Luke. Although I only joined in May this year, we've been working on projects together for a good portion over 2 years by now. Both Kat and Luke founded the company back in 2009 as a managed service provider, where we're transitioning towards technology success provider business. And it has been developed through strategic partnerships with security vendors. Is how we met the local communities in Kingston, London, into what it is today. So we're 12 employees strong, have a good set of skills between all of us together, and our mission is to make the world of technology work for any business. We achieve this with a people-first approach. So it is our belief that technology and IT especially should enable your business rather than hinder it. So here's what we're covering today. I'm quite sure that I won't have to spend ages on the first bit, as everybody knows what Office 365 is. Second part of the webinar will be about personal data usage and how this plays a role in the grand scheme of things, as Microsoft is very specific about infrastructure, personal and company data. This will then lead us into a discussion about security and the everlasting question of who is responsible for what. So in the last section, before the Q&A and before wrapping things up, we'll have a look at what it means when things go wrong with the cloud. Let me start with a question. Do you know the saying, the cloud is just someone else's computer? You've probably heard of it, right? So I'd say it's a bit more complicated than that, just a tiny bit, but realistically, the cloud is made of physical hardware. It's real hardware. It runs operating system, it runs applications, it is connected to the internet for you to make use of it. So both Azure and Office 365 have only been around for about 11 years, but I think no other platform attracted so many businesses and users in that time scale. It is designed and provided as a cloud-first application that covers pretty much everything that the old school packages offered, and much more on top of that. So Intune, for example, facilitates device management, and additional security features help admins to keep everything sound and safe. Microsoft offers two different service ranges. So on one hand, there's the business service, the business portfolio for up to 300 users per organization, and lots of the security add-ons. And then there's the enterprise range that comes without a OneDrive storage limit, that comes with advanced business intelligence tools, voice calling over Teams, and a million other things that would definitely go beyond the scope of this webinar. So if you're interested, ping me a message later today and I'll send some information your way, or even better, we just get together and talk it through. Lastly, in the past, Office was machine bound, right? This is a big one. People had their login credentials, access to some sort of locally hosted document management system or file server, and got on with their day. That worked as long as everybody had their own machine, came into the office, But now last year, the whole world panicked basically and was sent home, right? So it was a major disruption, and this was also the time for Microsoft to shine, and they 100% delivered. So Teams utilization alone increased by 870%. They even overtook Zoom, which is still used as like the #1 term for video conferencing. And one of the reasons this happened was that Teams is included in Office 365, right? There's no extra licensing. You can just use it on the second you utilize Office 365. So long story short, Office 365 is available anywhere. All you need are login credentials. Even this is made easier with Azure Identity Management. Provisioning was made a million times easier. It's a monthly subscription. If someone joins the organization, you can just add them. When a person leaves, decommission the license, get over it, done. And the benefits are huge. For once in the history of working with Microsoft, their licensing makes actual sense and allows for predictable budgeting. There's a standard pay-as-you-go model, if you like. If 5 users need 5 licenses at the cost of 5 times 1 user license, this whole thing is going to be built per month, and it's incredible. It's really, really awesome because there's no more hustle around this. You don't need a business finance degree to work out how much money you owe Microsoft. The other bit is all apps are connected via the cloud, right? So collaboration is suddenly extremely simple. You can work on the same documents in real time while video conferencing with your peers, with your colleagues, and then share the document with your cloud, with your client, sorry, all from the same platform. So this saves time, a lot of time actually, that can be spent on other projects or a longer coffee break with your partner who also happens to work from home. Yet another time saver is automated upgrades. Microsoft is managing the backend, as we said before. They make sure you have the latest versions of the tools that you need for your day-to-day. The days of waiting for the PowerPoint update, not upgrade, 5 minutes before the presentations are gone. Now you get to actually panic about the content instead. And lastly, Office 365 Business Premium and the Enterprise Suite come with a lot of out-of-the-box security features. I appreciate that they need configuration 100%, but they do their job really, really well once this is sorted. And 2 big examples that I hear often are advanced threat protection and monitoring. So monitors enable admins, the people managing your infrastructure, to stay on top of user activities and are the first indicator of malicious behavior. So ATP is an email filtering system that helps against unknown malware and viruses by providing robust 0-day protection, and it also includes features to safeguard from harmful links in real time. It almost sounds good to be true, but Microsoft increased their security play massively. Nonetheless, there are some caveats to it that we will go through later. When I first started working in IT and learned about the concept of public cloud services, I had a hard time understanding what data governance means, simply because there are quite a few different aspects to it. So there's operational data, things that need to be exchanged to make certain things work. There's intellectual property, so the things that your businesses produce or build in some shape or form. You have contracts, you have drawings, you have reports, that kind of sort of thing, right? And there's personal data like names, company numbers, registration credentials, data linked to user behavior. Intellectual property belongs to the creator of that work. So even if it's hosted in Office 365, you and your company own it, it's yours. It won't be used for anything but your defined purposes, and you're the only one responsible for it. Keep that in mind for later. Personal data, on the other hand, can be used for different purposes, including research and development. Microsoft uses it for direct advertisement and their performance analytics. And this sort of data is usually processed either manually or automatically. So sometimes you get a direct message from your sales rep potentially, or from your cloud service provider, telling you to look into certain things, right? This kind of the manual side of things. But if Cortana sends you an update email in the morning, you rest assured that this is 100% automated. And Microsoft holds that data outside your reach. So They host it separately and link back to it if an app needs it for one reason or another, right? Microsoft falls under regulations to ensure that your personal data is sound and safe. They fall under the same regulations actually that any other business. They're not special. They fall under GDPR. They fall under HIPAA compliance in the States, for example, all these good things. And your client's data, on the other hand, your client's data in an invoice in OneDrive is your responsibility because it falls under your intellectual property. You carried out a job, create the invoice. And this invoice, for example, now holds sensitive data in your Office 365 instance. Again, keep that in mind for later. You do have a bit of influence on the information that Microsoft is gathering. You don't need to share all personal information. If you don't want an analytics tool to run in the background, turn it off. Very simple. So probably should have mentioned it before, but the pink locations on the map of Europe indicate Microsoft's data centers or data center locations. Every single one of us is ISO 27001, 27002, SOC 1 and SOC 2 certified. It's close to impossible to get in, and it doesn't really matter if you try virtually or physically. I'd actually would love to see someone try, just because it will make up for a good laugh, I think. Microsoft also intends to keep it that way, and they are constantly under audit, right? So they employ a bunch of ethical hackers within the organization, and their job is literally to try and break what their colleagues have built, while external auditors try to do the same thing, basically, but and the goal is to uncover vulnerabilities. This approach to quality assurance is put together in a framework, and it allows Microsoft to provide their services with high availability. And they, over the last few years, they always achieved at least 3 nines, so 99.9% of uptime. And nowadays they aim for 4 nines, which is, well, quite astonishing given the hugeness of their estates. The other bit, the kind of other side to the coin, is if an incident occurs, Microsoft makes sure that every single detail is analyzed to prevent the same thing from happening again. So long story short, once again, this allows you to access your tools and files in real time, no matter what happens. So why are we here then, right? Talking about securing Office 365. It's always online, it's highly secure, nothing goes in or out unless Microsoft allows it. Well, the thing is, it's really not that simple. Microsoft runs a strict shared responsibility model. So Office 365 is a software as a service, or SaaS for short. If you take a closer look at the infographic, you find the information and data, devices and accounts and identities fall under the customer's responsibility. Microsoft is happy to provide the rest, everything that you need to work with those tools, from infrastructure to network, operating systems, and even the tools themselves, right? So you don't have to build your own Word. I don't know how that would even look like. I wouldn't even know where to start. But yeah, the data centers, as mentioned before, are close to impossible to intrude. But between you and me, they don't necessarily care about your emails, your calendar entries, or any sort of documents in your SharePoint or OneDrive. You're responsible for them, as mentioned before. If your teams accidentally delete the project folder, Microsoft won't guarantee to get it back for you. If an employee has something to hide and starts to cover up mistakes by changing data or even deleting documents, Microsoft won't get the originals back for you. If a developer tries a new workflow rule, looking at the apprentice in the office, and deletes all your emails, Microsoft won't get them back to you. Another thing is that phishing became a bigger threat during the pandemic than ever seen before for 2 reasons. So it was easier to surprise people with news that caught their attention, like, let's say, like furlough schemes or news from the NHS, vaccine dates later on, and many other tiny things that just raised an eyebrow mainly. And the other reason are poorly secured networks, right? So normally when you walked into your managed office, you had all these enterprise-grade firewalls to keep intruders out through endless filters and black and white lists and God knows what. And you potentially even had a team of IT professionals to keep everything updated. But now, instead of this best practice kind of idea scenario. Millions of people suddenly rely on well, for the lack of a better word, crappy like Virgin and TalkTalk hardware and their own personal devices. So the exact opposite, outdated Windows 7 machines running on accessing the internet and sensitive data through what Virgin calls a firewall, right? As silly as it sounds, on top of all of this, ransomware can nowadays be bought and is distributed through a network of cyber criminals as a service. Ransomware as a service. It's literally called ransomware as a service. So Office 365's evil twin, if you like. So successful intrusions even funded the development of more sophisticated malware as the cyber crime industry hit the $1 trillion threshold. So we go through a quick recap as we've been through quite a lot of information over the last few minutes. And following this, the next and last section will focus on the impact of data breaches on small and medium-sized businesses. We're also going to talk about measures that help prevent these scenarios, and lastly about disaster recovery options in case everything goes wrong, despite preventative measures. Before we go into these more details, let me know your biggest takeaway so far in the Q&A section. It'll be interesting to see. Might give me a new idea for a future webinar as well. So while you type, I go through the quick summary. So Office 365 is obviously a very great platform with lots of useful tools, some more known than others, and Microsoft guarantees uptime, so you'll almost always have access to your data. That being said, their services also fall under the shared responsibility model, which means that Microsoft covers hardware and software failure, natural disasters, and power outages, while you are responsible for your own data. They therefore will not cover data loss due to human error or malpractice, external hacks like brute force attacks or phishing scams. They will certainly not cover permanent deletion due to misconfiguration. So what does it actually mean when data is irreplaceably lost? Well, I mean, first and foremost, right, it means that there's disruption in your workflow. Very simply put, something is missing, something's not right, someone has to redo work. That's a terrible start. But now imagine it's not just a folder or a single file, but access to emails and all files, right? So my beautiful, clever wife works with PVC distributors. One of her clients was hit with a cyber attack at the end of November. Emails were down, the e-commerce store was down, telephony was down. So they were basically shut off from clients and suppliers for close to 2 weeks. The company in the end asked their employees to create Gmail accounts and Yahoo accounts, and their German branches had to go over to web.de, which is probably the shadiest service there is on the World Wide Web. So on top of that, they had to run their supply chain manually, right? So I mean, she was definitely not happy when she got the phone call. But imagine being in this position and imagine the embarrassment of having to make these calls to your business partners and customers, explaining, hey, sorry, everything is shut down. Now we have to send you letters, I guess, that I write myself. I don't know if you heard of Gartner before, but they are a global research and advisory firm. And you might have heard of them actually, because they have this magic quadrant for all sorts of tools. Their research, and that was well before the pandemic hit, early 2019, led them to predict that 70% of organizations will have suffered from a business disruption due to data loss in software as a service applications. And this is by no means a problem for large companies only. So a vast majority of SMEs who have experienced a breach said that it had an impact on their brand. If people can't get in touch with you or can't order from your homepage, they will buy from someone else. Company my wife works with, the group, they have about 150 staff or so, but the majority works in logistics. So it's once again by no means like an enterprise or corporate organization. You also might take a hit on your brand. You might lose a client, or not make that deal that was months in the making because you were not accessible. So I've spent a good portion of my professional career in business development and sales, right? If there's two things that I know, or if there's one thing I 100% know, is the timing and relationships are pretty much everything. So if something stops me from getting in front of the right person at the right time, I will most likely just lose that client because I will have lost their trust. So try to be a bit more positive moving forward, and I'm definitely not here to ruin your day or send you home worrying about Office 365, because there are a couple of really, really effective methods that can improve your cyber resilience. So the first one is fairly obvious. If you want to reduce the biggest threat to your cybersecurity, start with your own employees. Phishing emails and messages tend to use emotional triggers like fear or urgency to provoke a reaction, right? In most cases, it's just clicking on malicious links or attachments that contain ransomware or contain a Trojan that can just go through your files and release information that shouldn't be released. But these attacks could also aim at something like buying a Google Play card and sending the voucher code over to the person on the other line via WhatsApp, right? So make sure your staff is trained to recognize those phishing messages and test that knowledge every once in a while. The next big thing is identity and password management. So my favorite example is that when you start off in sales, you get your email account, you get a phone, and if you're really, really lucky, you just get a list of prospects, right? And in my belief, an entry-level sales rep shouldn't or doesn't need, and definitely shouldn't have access to the financial reports of your whole business, for example, or invoices to all your clients. The way to handle those things is to develop and deploy security policies to ensure best practice security standards. You can't. The other bit is also you can't really fight what you don't know, so your system should notify you about unusual behavior. So when I started sorting out my OneDrive the other day, and by sorting out I mean deleting a bunch of empty folders basically because they were obsolete, get about 5 Teams messages from different people in my organization because, well, it is unusual behavior. Our system flagged it, explained, hey, why is this happening basically? And that was great news to me because on one hand I knew, well, I did something wrong, so I can improve my own behavior. But on the other hand, we also have things under control, and it's a clever system because it just automatically rings an alarm bell for the people who are in charge of managing your infrastructure. In summary, bad actors make a living by exploiting vulnerabilities. There could be an unused domain that looks similar to yours and can be exploited for phishing emails, or an outdated personal device that is used for business purposes. Coming back to the Windows 7 on a Virgin network example, it is important to know about these things before someone employs them. So make sure to run regular audits. Involve an ethical hacker to uncover potential risks before they become huge problems. Now, this is kind of, this is somewhat my favorite slide and my least favorite slide because recovery is a double-edged sword, right? On one hand, it's the least desirable last stage after an attack and requires a lot of planning and budgeting. On the other hand, it can also prolong the attack indefinitely if it's not planned at all. So let's just assume we actually want to follow best practices. In that case, there are 2 key metrics that build the foundation of any recovery scenario: recovery point and recovery time objective. Of course, both are kind of worthless if you can't get your data back at all. So always make sure to take and test regular backups. But building business continuity strategy evolves around the 2 following questions: how much data am I willing to lose, and how long will it take me to be fully operational again? The key here is consistency in testing. Once again, make sure that you take regular backups. Microsoft won't help you if your data is encrypted. They also won't help if someone deleted it for no matter what reason. Equally important, and this is what we mentioned earlier in regards to how Microsoft covers incidents, is to learn from your mistakes. So because it's rather a question of when than if something will go wrong. And after you back up and running, find out what happened, the cause behind the incident, basically. Narrow down when it happened and who was involved. This process will allow you to identify new vulnerabilities. And as information security is really not just a one-off project, we're looking at an area that is covering dynamic systems and processes in a constantly changing environment, right? So it's not like I implement something now and can just wait for 10 years before before there's a new system that I redeploy, and then I have to start the process all over again. It's an ever-changing environment. Keep on top of it. And once you will have identified these gaps in your cybersecurity, in your cyber resilience, make sure to close them. Keep at it, and you will ultimately be able to work from anywhere security. So, yeah, it was good fun so far. Let's maybe have a look at if we have any questions. So, yeah, what questions do we have? Let's have a look at this wonderful chat. I was granted the second monitor for this presentation today. So, exceptional. Right. So, oh, cool. There's a question about what tools we use. So it's literally, what tools do you use? And it is a great question. As you can imagine, because we're managing and monitoring not only our own data, but lots of customer data and lots of customer networks and lots of customer endpoints, basically. On one hand, laptops, on the other hand, also mobile devices like tablets, smartphones. We have a couple of clients who run their own app development section and stuff like this. We need to have just a layered approach, right? We can't just do it on the run. We have to plan everything to come up with a best practice guide that we deploy right after onboarding people. So what we, just from a SaaS perspective and just from a laptop perspective, what we typically do is we deploy a cloud-hosted endpoint detection and response tool, which is fairly clever, helps us, well, protect the end user machine. And then we back up the local machine and any cloud-hosted application that we can. As we are a Microsoft house, our team have the skills to make great use of the security features that Microsoft comes with, including a ATP, as mentioned before, advanced threat protection. And then, as a wonderful highlight, we use a phishing tool to test our employees and clients. As we said before, people need to catch up on how a phishing email looks like, or how a phishing message can look like, or people even WhatsApping them, right? So we do this with a tool we have, and on top of that, we obviously provide the training and monthly drop-in sessions for our clients to cover any questions that they might have. One last thing worth mentioning is password manager. Very basic, but highly efficient. We use a cloud-hosted application that holds passwords, and it definitely comes with neat features like a generator, password generator, right? I'm not necessarily the most creative person on this planet. We had to pick a password, a different password for every single page that I'm registered on and that I need to be able to do my job alone. I would run out of ideas roughly in 5 minutes. So yeah, it just makes sure that passwords are secure. There are definitely a couple more things that we can discuss in more detail after this webinar. In the meantime, if you do want to check if your personal or business email have been compromised, search for "Have I Been Pawned?" Pawned is pwned.com, and just have a look for yourself, play around. It will tell you something went wrong. It's basically monitors the dark web, if you like, and uses the email address that you give it to just see if it popped up already for sale. Cool. Hope that answered your question. There's as a whole. Let's see, is there someone else? Nice. So we do have another question. So very exciting. It's about the backup. So where do we store them? If it's locally, if it's cloud. And once again, excellent question. Thanks for bringing that up. So the answer is ideally both. But it highly depends on what we're backing up, right? So it used to be everybody had a small business server or something in the office. So you try to have a local backup and then reproduce to the cloud to just bring in some geo redundancy. But there's absolutely no point in backing up cloud hosted applications to local drives. It already sounds a bit silly. So what we do instead is get the data directly from Microsoft through their API and store it safely to a UK-based data center. This happens 3 times a day. By the end of all of this, we have daily reports to show us if everything is in working order. And if not, there's also a process for troubleshooting, right? So far, everything went well, but hey, you never know, right? Nothing is perfect. It's always good to be prepared. Does this answer the question? Nice one. Let's have a further look. Which password manager would you recommend? So we use Bit1 internally. It's built on an open source platform, which means there are a lot of very talented, very individual contributors that have close to no personal gain in hiding information, basically, which is really, really nice. And yeah, there is. Should I potentially bring on my wonderful boss, my managing director, the brain behind my operations, basically? Kat, you up for this?
Yes, sure. I'm happy to sort of dive into the next question. Just how many different backups should you take? Another cloud external hard drive. So what I would say is it always depends on what your scenario is, how many backups you need to take. Obviously, having just one backup doesn't leave you much to recover from. So what I would normally recommend is to look at how long you can go without being able to restore. So if you have lots of changing data and if you lose an hour across tens or hundreds of employees, it will cost you a lot of money. So having regular, very intense backup procedure in place, and obviously also having different types of backups, so you can have a real-time backup of files. So every time a file gets changed, it gets backed up as it gets changed, as well as image type backups for whole machine servers, so you can restore and recover the state of the entire machine, which is important, especially if you're running different kind of software which have specialized settings and all sorts of things which take a very long time to set up. And if you have to reinstall the machine, you would then be losing hours or days of work from there. So it's very important to sort of go through the scenario and work out how much it will cost you if your whole business isn't able to operate. And from that, it will also lead into sort of security of, how can you prevent your entire network going down? Things like research and development, sometimes they need more freedom than sort of day-to-day office workers. So separating the network and minimizing the risks is a great way to sort of mitigate and be able to sort of, your DR and having to only do partial rather than a full DR for your whole site.
Nice.
Another question we have: what is your advice on how to best backup Office, I guess 365 rather than 362? Which tool would you recommend? So shall we get Yuri to dive into this one?
Yeah, absolutely. Given that I was trained on Office 365 backup for about 2.5 years, might be a smart move. We work closely with a company called Datto. It's the cybersecurity vendor that I grew up with, if you like, in the IT industry, and they have this wonderful tool with lots of different options that links directly into Microsoft's data center, while providing us full visibility of what's going on. So it is ultimately the best, or not the, well, arguably the best tool, but we chose it because on one hand it's for many reasons, but on one hand it's highly resilient, right? It offers a lot of configurations that allow us to maintain a high security level. It offers us huge portions of visibility that other tools didn't provide previously. And Datto operates a UK-based data center, which is also ISO 27001, 27002, SOC 1 and 2 certified, which brings us to the benefits of having a redundant data center to what Microsoft themselves is doing, right? So even if all 3 data centers of Microsoft in the UK were down, inaccessible, we'd still have your back to be able to provide you with anything that we were able to gather previously, and could even tell you when exactly the snapshot was taken of your estate. So yeah, that was a cool solution. There are a couple of others. Tools such as Kronos, very confusing platform. There's Veeam, which offers the possibility to host yourself. But as I said earlier, I just don't see the point of backing up a cloud-hosted infrastructure to on-prem, which it sounds counterintuitive, and it 100% is, because you would have to, just going back to what Kat said, you would have to then take the on-prem backup and add another geo-redundant instance to it. So basically create a backup of a backup somewhere else, which overcomplicates things and adds very confusing operational layers to the whole idea of making something easy and secure for you to utilize. So, yeah. Nice. Maybe to add to this front is Microsoft is, or Office 365 is a bit more complex than just the normal productivity suite that we had in the past. So nowadays there are team shares, there are OneDrive shares, there are SharePoint shares, there are emails, there are shared mailboxes, there are calendar entries, there are contact details, right? So if you go for a tool, just make sure that everything is covered. And if you want to make your life easy, obviously work with us. But if you want to make your life easy, look out for the licensing model, because some vendors just split it in half, kind of tell you, oh, emails are that price, while blah blah, all the other stuff is another price, which makes no sense, in my opinion. It's a bit overly complicated. Cool. Looks like everything calmed down a little bit. No more questions. Well, we're still here for another minute or two or so. So if anything pops to mind, just type away. We're here to help. If we're good at questions now, let's start to wrap things up. I would like to thank you for joining us today. If you have any more questions right after this call, or want to share your feedback, I'm okay with taking all sorts of feedback, but I prefer the positive ones. So yeah, give me a shout on LinkedIn, or even better, just book a one-to-one consultancy session with me through the schedule online button on our webpage. It's iqnit.uk. And yeah, it's even marked in a wonderful pink circle on the last page of this presentation, which is awesome. So the last thing worth mentioning is we figured that everybody likes a good offer, right? So we are going to include unlimited OneDrive backup storage with every tenant that you want us to secure and work out a security strategy for you and your teams. So I like codes. I like voucher codes. So we came up with code SOC for Security Operating Center 365. And you can use it when you book your one-to-one session through the homepage. Just chuck it in the notes, or if you reach out on LinkedIn to me, just start with it if you like. So I actually know where I'm being attacked from. Righty. So still no new questions. So I guess it's time to say goodbye. Have a great rest of your day, and we talk soon.